So this guy, right, Matt MEYER, I think that's how you pronounce it, Matt MEYER. I don't know if it's a pun on being the mayor, but this guy's the governor of Delaware. So, Matt, what are you doing? So this guy, Matt MEYER, he's about to sign this bill for approval for assisted suicide. So the Americans are all over this as well. I think this guy's a Democrat because it's got the colours. It's not got like Republican colours. Oh, is he Republican? Oh, he's a former public school teacher and small business owner. So he's in with all this kind of like woke school ideology, you know, where you're not allowed to say this or that. Loads of school teachers getting arrested for their opinions, basically, in school, or, you know, we've just actually in England, we've just stopped this gender nonsense, all this, like, you know, 25 different genders or whatever. There's just male and female. So these school teachers are all over this sort of woke ideology. So this guy wants to sign the assisted suicide bill. And he looks like he's a Democrat. So he's one of this kind of like Biden woke crew. This is the guy here, you know. So this guy, he kind of reminds me, he looks a little bit like the Australian Prime Minister, doesn't he, a little bit? I've just watched a little video of this guy, so I've heard him talking, so I've got an idea. He's definitely like full-on woke. So what is the problem with this bill, right? Matt, don't sign this bill, whatever you do, because you don't understand the law. I don't really think you can't legally do it. There are some things that cannot be made law because previous laws and constitutions disallow it, right? But all this kind of like European Union law and certain other things claim that they're going to override it. Like the World Health Organization, WHO, were going to override a load of rights, okay? The World Health Organization was going to do it to the whole world, but like we stopped it. And, you know, Donald Trump's pulled away from that now. So this is a little bit of a rebellion from Matt MEYER. He's kind of rebelling against the Republicans, really, who kind of like at least can see sense with all this gender nonsense and, you know, assisted suicide stuff. So, Matt, right, you need to understand this. And it's not actually got anything to do with your religious beliefs or not, right? It's not really to do with whether you have a faith or believe in a faith or not, right? It's actually whether you believe in the law or not, right? The law in America and England, whether you like it or not, right? And regardless of if you are a Christian or Muslim or Islamic or Buddhist or whatever, whether you like it or not, right? The American Constitution and law is founded and enacted with a power, an entity of force attributed to the Christian God. In God we trust, right? Even Donald Trump was, you know, throwing this in his speeches, you know, when he got inaugurated and in some of his other speeches, right? So the Constitution of America, which makes it legally into a country with a legal system itself and law, right, ascribes the power, identifies, acknowledges, and affirms that it is being enacted into a force of effect and power through God, right? The Christian God. Whether you like it or not, doesn't matter whether you believe in that power or not. You can refuse to believe in electricity, right? But when you turn the power on, right, your kettle boils or your Hoover, like, you know, sucks up, right? You don't have to understand how or why. It just works, right? Now, they want people to abide by the law, right? To obey the law, to comply with it, right? Now, you might, you know, a psychologist, like, you know, what do you call him? What's that Canadian guy called now? I forgot his name. The guy who just lost his license, right, to practice psychology. And I don't know why I can't think of his name right now. Jordan Peterson, that's it. Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson could come out with loads of theories, debates and arguments around whether God exists or not, right? And he could say that people comply with the law because of psychology, because of social conditioning, because of habit, or just because, it's everyone else does it, right? It could be psychological, neurological. There are many scientific terminologies which can be used to describe why people should obey the law or why they do obey the law, right? But legally on paper, right, unless you want to write off the entire country and say that, chuck every act or bill in the bin and say that you don't have to comply with it, it's legally acknowledged that all of the acts of law are to force and effect through a power, right, which compels humans to obey it, which is through God's grace, in American law as well as English law, right? And until you change that, right, then therefore, that is the force and power which you're actually wanting the citizens to comply with, right, and obey through that jurisdictive authority, really. God is the supreme judge, right? It's enacted in law. Now, when it comes to religion and the Bible, Jesus had teachings. He taught people, and he expected people to act like he acted. He expected them to, and he said that Christians should, right? And if they don't, it's sins and all this, right? And I'm not going to get too wacky, crazy Christian dogmatic, right? But the Bible, they ask you to comply with it. They expect you to follow the teachings, but with the thing is, with the Bible, it has got the Old Testament, and it's actually the Ten Commandments. Whether I'm not saying that I even like or agree with them, but this is like league in law, right? The Ten Commandments are actually commandments, right? Jesus didn't actually command anyone, I don't think, as far as I know, to do anything, right? Jesus did not command anyone to do anything. He taught them how they should, share food out, and various other parables and teachings. Jesus didn't actually, as far as I know, and, I haven't read the entire Bible, so you might get me wrong on this, right? Jesus didn't actually make any commandments. He just gave teachings, right? And if you want to correct me on that, you can. Moses supposedly parted the water, right? But I'm not going to get into that. He commanded the water. He didn't command people, whether you believe that or not. But as for the Ten Commandments, those are actually ascribed to God, right? Moses isn't claiming them as his. He doesn't say like, these are my commandments, and I command you to do it. He didn't command anyone to do it, right? It's actually ascribed to and attributed to coming directly from God, right? Those 10 commandments are actually commandments, right? And therefore, they're actually within the actual power of God, if you believe there is a power. But you don't have to believe in God, because you can be a Muslim, or you can be Islamic, or you can be a Buddhist or whatever. You don't have to be a Christian. But the thing is, the American Constitution and the American country, they could have just enacted it like Scientology, and said that on the basic principles of science, we will, get everyone to comply with this law and legislation through the effects of psychology. We will promote these laws, and we will, use advertising, promotion, social conditioning, peer pressure to make people comply with them, right? But that's not the American Constitution. It's not founded on Scientology or scientific principles, right? It actually is. It declares that it is to effect and force through the grace of God and God's power. That is the force and power which compels people to comply with and obey legislation, right? Or otherwise no one would follow the law, right? Unless you're lying. But it's not. It's in writing, right? So that is the same force of effect of which the source and commandments come from God, right? And I ain't even Jewish or anything, right? This is law, legally in law, right? Unless you're just ignorant, unless you want to be ignorant. So if you make a law which goes against the force and power of which enacts it, what you're actually doing is, if you set up a electric circuit, right, and you plug a battery in and there's a flow, positive and negative, and you've got resistance, transistors, resistors, right, it's got a flow on the circuit, right, and you're trying to go against that force. So almost if you're going over the Niagara Falls and you try to swim back up it, it's not going to work. You can't. Well, you might get some idiot trying to do it, but what I'm saying is, you could climb up the rock face, but you can't, float. Now, now you're getting into Moses parting the water and Jesus walking on water. But I'd like to see can Matt Meyer, right, go stand at the bottom of the Niagara Falls and float back up it against the flow of the river, right, and paddle back up? No. Why? Because he's going opposite to the flow. Now, this is the thing. The Ten Commandments come from God, whether you like it or not, whether you believe them in or not. And that is you've subscribed to that faith in religion and whatever commandments and orders there are. Now, people sin in the Bible. They sin and do wrong. Matt Meyer is sinning now, but he's more than just not doing, the teachings of Jesus. He's actually going against commandments and power. Now, the thing is, the American government is enacting laws, right? So it believes that people should follow their commandments. The American government believes that, right, the citizens of America, Delaware, right, should obey the commandments of Matt Meyer, right? But Matt Meyer won't obey the commandments of, what put the force of law into effect. Now, if he wants to, maybe he should write all the enactments, by the power of Jordan Peterson's philosophical debate. We herefore enact laws into effect, right? And then, if you've got any problem with complying with the law, you can argue with Jordan Peterson and not with God. This is the thing, so... It doesn't. It's not down to religious belief or not. It's actually in law. In the law, this is what it actually is, right? So, what I think what Joe Biden and Matt Meyer really want to do is somehow make it so American legislation isn't enacted through God's grace, and instead, maybe it could be enacted through, the temporal lobe of Bill Gates or something, by the intellectual powers of Bill Gates and the understanding of, I don't know, the assembly of university professors and their knowledge of the fundamental workings of the universe. We hereby enact that everyone will comply with this law through the power of psychology and influence, right? But it's not. If it was, right, then, the scientific understanding of knowledge and the principles of cause and effect would be the power by which you compel people to comply with it through known principles. But it isn't. It's actually through the divine power of God, which is identified as the Christian God, of which that is enacted in the force which compels everyone to obey it, right? Therefore, if you're expecting everyone to obey American law, then you're expecting them to comply with the Ten Commandments, because they actually are commandments. Now, I'm not saying that everyone does comply with them, but he still commands those commandments anyway, right? As much as the law. Now, if you want to change those commandments, then maybe go ask God. But, Matt Meyer is not God. Matt Meyer is not God, like Ronaldo is not God. So, what I would do if I was Matt Meyer to make his bill legally possible is, he needs to change the God, which is attributed to the American Constitution, which is not an easy task. And then he'll have something, on his hands, and then they can have a debate, and there'll be some protest then. So, it doesn't work. What he's trying to do in law, legally in writing, is say that, I'm making a commandment against a commandment, right? Which this commandment goes against the commandment of which we've been commanded to do through this law and the power that the law is acknowledging that is put into force through and by, right? Which, it's literally, go grab hold of, electric cable, and argue with that. This is the thing. An American electric cables are a lot less voltage than England. It's like 240 volts in it or whatever. So, and I have had 240 volts up to my elbow before. So, what he's trying to do is, he's trying to enact a law which goes against the law. Which, this is what they're starting to do with, this ridiculous Section 230, all this exemption of platforms from constitutionally protected materials and so forth, which, you can't do because, they say, no, it's not constitutionally protected. Platforms are exempt from the law, which is ridiculous because, we've already said that it only protects from civil liability. Yet, if you disobey the constitutional protection, it's a criminal contempt, not civil. This is like Bill Clinton type, acts. So, MEYER is, these kind of like, school teacher, new woke school teacher ideology, It's like, fair enough, we don't smack hands with rulers anymore. Teachers don't pull their trousers down on the kids and smack their bum with a ruler or whatever they used to do. Hold your hand out or smack it, hit it with a, a God knows what, a cane, the cane, right? But this is what Trump's talking about, all this like woke ideology, like, all these 25 genders or whatever it is. What it is, it's wishful thinking and fantasy. And it's like, dogs, effectively, right? I mean, if people like dogs and they want to have loads of dogs, then, I'm not stopping them. But this is the thing. If you look at all these dogs, they're all like, all these pedigree dogs, it's not good. It's like they're all got some kind of like, genetic defect or disease. Now, people like that, they're stroking them, they're petting their dogs, right? They're petting their dogs, they're stroking them. But compared to what the canine is meant to be like, right? Some of these dogs are handicapped and disabled. They're handicapped and disabled by breeding, right? So they're bred to be handicapped and disabled. Now, that's perfectly okay if you're an owner and you want all these like nice little cute dogs who come along and lick you and and stuff like that. But really, in nature, right, they're not evolved to look after themselves. Really, they're almost kind of like people wanting to put clothes on them like kids, but they're not. Look at those sausage dogs, for example. They have back problems, right? They're prone to severe back problems, the sausage dogs, right? Now, that's one example. Some of the dogs don't have a neck properly, right? And other things. If humans just suddenly vanished, right, a lot of these dogs would have difficulty doing things like climbing or defending themselves and things like that. Now, does the government really want to make people into like all these weird pedigree dogs, right? Oh, there's 52 different genders and, 100 different colours. You can have a blue dog with blue fur or whatever. This is all fantasy and wishful thinking going berserk and without sense, just through like the power of the imagination, the human imagination should not be allowed to go berserk, right, without, being checked. Because it might be good for Bill Gates, because then all these nice little dogs just do what he says, like roll over, give me a paw, and they can do all these cool little tricks, like buy Windows and press next, install Windows, put your paw on, press next, install, right? And that's the way they're going with these apps. This is the way they're going with these computers, right? As long as they've got a few dogs that can, with little scientist goggles on, that can, whatever, make me some, test tubes, or, make me some, chemistry, tests, whatever. As long as they've got a few smart dogs, like the Gremlins, the Gremlins, had like, the scientist Gremlin, and mixing experiments and so forth, right? But, the rest of them like Gizmo. This is the thing. Are they trying to make humans into these kind of like, domestic, cute, cuddly creatures that are obedient and aren't really that capable of doing anything substantial, without, Bill Gates's, what was in a frame network? This is the thing. And this is the way that all these kind of like, it's all right to be a hippie, or to be, a metaler or whatever. But when you start encouraging all these teenagers and children to like, have, I might have, like I'll remove 3 fingers, or, maybe I'll like, like Prince had a bone removed so he could apparently suck his own dick or whatever, or, all these weird, all these completely insane body modifications and so forth, where's it going to stop? Someone wants their head operated on and attached to their elbow or something like that just because they want to, right? That's like freaky, and they're heading in that direction now. Like, I'll have like, fucking studs implanted in my knuckles, right? Like, a human knuckle duster. Is that, for self-defense or what? This is the thing. I mean, there needs to be an imagination check, to be, these are the things that actually, people are actually going nuts. I mean, what if you had a dog that, started to eat itself? Never mind assisted suicide. What if one of these dogs, could move its neck so, it could eat itself, could eat its own leg or something. But, they won't put it past these people, the way that they're going with these pedigree dogs. It's not actually natural. The thing is, and this is what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on with. Like, why are people getting ill? Why are people susceptible to these diseases? Why are they getting dementia? But that dementia, right? The dementia is a symptom of the breeding through the food system and the effects, and even the effects from the TV and the movies and all these school shootings. So things like that. So, these things that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now investigating, the dis-ease, the diseases, and the disabilities, and these other factors like the dementia that are occurring, is synonymous in humans with these changes in the dogs, right? Like ridiculous, like, why are these sausage dogs got, a body that's 6 feet long or whatever, this is the thing, because they've been selected, fed and adapted in this way. And this is the thing, who's doing it and is it orchestrated or not? But this is just like, this is a suicide thing, why would they want to kill themselves? This is the thing with terminal illness. Why have they got the terminal illnesses? You would think that, you'd make your best efforts to stop the terminal illnesses from occurring before you would, allow people to end their life because of them. What happened, effectively, right? You might as well say, should people with dementia, right, be allowed to end their lives because they've got dementia? Now, would you put the law through first to stop people with dementia from ending their life, or would you try and cure the dementia first, right? Well, you try and cure the dementia first. This is the thing, and I don't think 6 months is that long time. It passes quite quickly. People can be, they can have painkillers and things. But, I think it's a political move. It's the assisted suicide thing. It's the wanting, if you start, it's the attitude. If you bring that attitude in, right, it's going to lead everyone down the wrong path, because that's what happened with the food, the attitudes of the food, and then everyone went slack and just, and that's what happened to the health. And the same with this dementia thing. So what it's doing, and the same with all this, 100 different genders, they've been trying to, get them to accept that there are all these ridiculous genders, which there aren't. You've got, masculine, you can have masculine women, and you can have feminine men, right? But, where do those descriptive terms come from? This is the thing, right? Know how there are only two genders, right? But they try to invent all these other ones, but how we describe them is mainly based on the other two genders, It's ridiculous. So I don't think it's legal. Currently, I don't think it's legal. I think if this guy does it, it's actually against constitutional law, because what he's trying to say is that the United States Constitution and law is not in effect through God's grace. It's in effect through another power or some other power which doesn't carry certain commandments with it. Those 10 commandments, really, like, I've realised in law, legally, they're almost kind of like your constitution. And I aren't even Jewish, and I don't even advocate supporting, whatever religion. But through learning about the law, right, and what all our charters and things like that are, that is what the law is, So, and there isn't actually anything too ridiculous in those commandments. They're all quite straightforward and essential. They're all quite, not essential, they're straightforward and kind of like, pretty simple, really. And there are a lot more acts of law already, which, those commandments aren't really that strict compared to, a lot of other laws that are all, in effect, for things like, not allowed to, touch someone on the leg or whatever, all these ridiculous, laws of sexuality, they're really strict laws, really. So I don't think that those commandments are that strict compared to, it's only like teenagers who are just, teenagers who are like, angry and, listen to Nirvana and stuff like that, who are not necessarily, religious or whatever, that have some kind of like weird dogmatic thing about them. But, I mean, you can't break with... The bottom line is that we're starting to be ignorant for the sake of novelty, value, or whims, and you can't be ignorant to legal facts, whether you like them or not. So, you could, what would you do about the Constitution? Change it over, swap it over to Scientology or whatever, and then you've got a serious debate. You've got a serious debate then, something worth debating about, where you change, the entire Constitution over to, Scientology or something like that.